to express our gratitude for the folks here at Kitakyushu University. You all have been very hospitable. You have a beautiful campus located in a beautiful city, and we could not be more thrilled to be here. I'd also like to give you my roadmap. We will read one disadvantage and then move on to our case arguments. I will begin my speech now. Thank you. The first argument is an elections disadvantage. Prime Minister Noda has staked his political career on the consumption tax, but passing the consumption tax risks fracturing the DPJ. This is according to Nakamoto, a reporter for the Financial Times, on March 30th, 2012. Prime Minister Noda, quote, staked his political career on the tax increase. Fierce opposition to the tax increase among a number of members of the DPJ could give rise to a breakup of the party, end quote. That would create a no-confidence vote for early election, which turns the case. And if anybody knows anything about no confidence, it's this guy. This evidence is from Harner, contributor to Forbes magazine, on March 14, 2012. The DPJ is in near revolt against the tax increase. The aftermath would be a general election, unquote. That will cause a third-party takeover by Osaka Mayor Toru Hashimoto. This evidence is from Reynolds and Hirokawa, reporters for Bloomberg News, on May 22, 2012. Quote, the Democrats must, on no account, call for an election. We would lose. If there was an election now, I think it would be a massive victory for Hashimoto, unquote. Next, Hashimoto will oppose the restarting of the nuclear power plants. This is according to NHK News on April 16, 2012. Quote, Hashimoto has pledged that his party will seek a public mandate on the central government's nuclear power policy. Hashimoto criticized the government on Monday for giving the green light to restarting the Ohi nuclear power plant, which supplies electricity to Japan's second largest city of Osaka. Finally, the impact is that it will destroy Japan's economic recovery. This is according to Reuters in 2011. Quote, Japan's economy will suffer major damage if it reduces output from the nuclear power stations. Should there be a sudden brake applied on the Japanese economy, it could have a very big impact for the global economy as a whole, unquote. I would now like to move on to our on-case arguments. First, raising the consumption tax hurts old people, and we know none of you want to hurt grandma and grandpa. Raising the consumption tax would cause capital flight, which would lead to a decrease in public revenue. This is according to Ron Rimkus, a Master of Business Administration and an expert in asset management and investing, on April 19, 2012. Quote, in economics, there are only trade-offs. So it is a fallacy to think that increasing tax rates will necessarily increase tax revenues to the government. Japan's funding model is vulnerable to changes, especially changes from tax policy. What if the rise in tax rates causes capital flight from Japan, and the delicate funding deficit accelerates? Of course, even doubling the consumption tax wouldn't be sufficient, but they don't even double the consumption tax. They only increase it by 2%. This evidence that says doing so is insufficient is from Hayashi, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, on January 30th, 2012. Many economists question whether Noda's plan is big enough. Even if it doubles the sales tax by 2015, it likely won't be able to meet its goal of balancing its annual fiscal budget by 2020. Next, we believe you should not believe the crisis headlines. These headlines have been repeatedly wrong, and Japan is not at a risk of financial meltdown. This is according to Ron Rimkus again on April 19, 2012. Japan should have collapsed a long time ago, yet Japan has avoided a debt crisis because many investors have bet against Japan over and over again and lost. Investors who have gambled on the thesis that Japan's financial structure is unsustainable have been forced to learn one of the harshest lessons of investing. Of course, we have more evidence for this claim because Japan is in a unique situation when compared to places like Europe. There will be no debt crisis, and this proves especially to be important because there's no reason why we would want to decrease the issuing of Japanese government bonds. This evidence is also from Hayashi on January 30th, 2012. The OECD estimates reconstruction spending will boost gross government debt to 230% of GDP in 2013 from 218% this year. For Italy, the comparable figure for 2012 is projected to be 128%. Those numbers, however, haven't scared off most investors. Rather, the troubles in Europe have prompted many to shift their money into Japanese bonds, still seen as a safe haven. In other words, the issuing of government bonds is a good thing. Next, our opponent's evidence assumes right now that there are no elderly people that have benefits through employment. But that's not true, and many of the aging population in Japan have pension programs subsidized through their employers. Furthermore, there is no risk of their ability to solve poverty because poverty is inevitable. Providing elder care benefits isn't going to be able to solve this. And while we understand that Japanese people are much smarter than American people, we still don't think that you all are smart enough to be able to completely eradicate poverty. Finally, the demographic crisis that is talked about in the media and in our opponent's evidence is a myth invested by Western commentators, envious of Japanese socialized medicine, and let's be frank here, Westerners aren't really that good at people. Our evidence comes from Fingleton in the New York Times on January 30th, 2012. Many Westerners actively seek to belittle Japan. Take, for instance, how Western observers have viewed Japan's demographics. The population is getting older because of a low birth rate, a characteristic that Japan shares with many of the world's richest nations. It never seems to occur to Western commentators that the Japanese, both individually and collectively, have chosen their demographic fate. They have good reasons for doing so. Psychology aside, a major factor of the problem is that virtually everyone in Tokyo benefits from this doom and gloom story. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Slow down, so.
The narrative speech will be examined by the affirmative within 3 minutes.
May I ask you a question? For disadvantage, you said after taking plan, the prime minister will be changed or something like that.
Correct. We believe that if NODA is successful in passing an increase to the consumption tax, there will be a fracturing or a split within the DPJ, and that will permit Osaka Mayor Hashimoto to be elected in an early election.
So your disadvantage assumption comes from, so after taking plan, the prime minister will be changed. And
correct.
Yeah, Mr. Noda will be retire. And after that,
well, he won't retire as much as he'll be voted out.
Yeah, and second assumption comes from, so after that, so Mr. Hashimoto will be chosen as a prime minister.
Correct.
Which kind of sentence proves that point?
So that is our Reynolds and Hirakawa evidence, which I can bring to you. It says that if the Democrats call an early election, then there's a very high chance that Hashimoto will win.
Oh, just chance.
Very high chance.
Just chance, okay. Then, yeah, moreover, your disadvantage impact is the economic damage or something like that. But this assumption comes from there will be no nuclear power plant operation in Japan.
Right. We say that right now the Japanese economy is resilient. It's able to handle some of these little shocks that come from things like the pension system. But one of the reasons it's resilient is because of the revenue it gets from nuclear power.
Okay, okay. But anyway, the reason of disadvantage happens, impact happens because of no nuclear power plant after ground. However, what is the difference between status quo and after ground? Because under the status quo, even in Japan, there are no nuclear power plant operation almost.
Well, not right now, but they're all slated to be restarted. As recently as 3 days ago, restarting of the nuclear power plants was approved. Those will restart, and then we will be able to earn the revenue. If they don't get restarted, which will happen if Hashimoto takes office, then the economic impacts will occur.
But I want to confirm that this disadvantage impact assumption comes from, so under the status quo, there are no nuclear power plant operation.
But that's only temporary.
Okay.
So they will restart soon, unless Hashimoto is elected.
And you, as an impact, you prove that. Thank you.